Charles asked me to do this, we decided that for the most part he wanted me to speak more on the aftermath or after effects of the '67 rebellion. In particular, I'm going to focus more on stress. But I want to say a few things about '67 because it's important to understand how we get to stress. But I want to first read a poem that Dudley Randall wrote in response to what was happening in '67. Somewhere on a rooftop, you fight for me. The '67 rebellion was instigated, aggravated by a number of factors. The destruction of Black Bottom, historic Black neighborhood for the I-75 freeway to come through, which then moved a lot of people into certain concentrated areas, in particular the 12th Street, where the Wright explodes. And many of you know this who were living at the time. But more specifically, the aggravation, or shall we say the spark, was the result of a confrontation with police. But it wasn't so much that particular one, it was the long history of police repression of Black people in the city of Detroit. For those of us who were growing up, we know and feared what was called the Big Four. And they used to really patrol like the high schools and harass young people. I mean, with school books. And this would be 2 uniformed cops and 2 plainclothes cops. And the point was intimidation. We also have to recognize that prior to Comey Young's election, there wasn't even a % of Black police. It was essentially white police, and by 1967, we're moving toward a majority Black city. And so they were basically, and even in fact, Time magazine described them as an army of occupation, many of whom did not even live in the city any longer, but were living in the suburbs and coming in and acting to the benefit of persons and institutions and authority figures who did not represent Black people. And there were other incidents, as you might recall, the New Bethel incident, that was where the cops came in, and actually was a shootout with the Republican New Africa, and the Honorable and late Judge Crockett literally set up a courtroom in a police station to deal with this ridiculous injustice. But also, and this leads into the stress shootings, and what happens after '67 is also the influx of heroin into the Black communities. This was also a strategy that was used to repress Black militarism, that if you got the people addicted to heroin, then it would also undercut the rebellions and the militarization, not militarization, but the militancy of young Black people in major cities. This is not just in Detroit. This was happening, all over the country. And as we know, heroin is not, poppies are not grown in the continental United States. And there's been all kinds of studies to indicate that there is a connection. We used to have a saying, CIA cocaine import agency. And this was one of those things that you have to, as we indicated, you have to read the research done by people who are not, mainstream. But this was a major problem, which essentially led to the situation in Detroit in 1972. Also, you have, at this time, an increased pressure on Black communities in terms of policing. And the then Commissioner John Nichols puts together Stress, Stop the Robberies, and Joyce Safe Street. That's hilarious. It's like, really, dude? As if they cared about our streets being safe. But what happens, of course, and this is a very personal story for Charles, and it's a very personal story for me, because my family was directly impacted. My brother was a part of a underground cadre that was actually trying to deal with the drug problem. And I'm going to be reading from a small section out of this biography on Dudley Randall, because it also deals largely with the history of Detroit, and as well as the artistic community's response. And at a certain point, we'll be actually, hopefully be able to see a clip related to the hearings that took place during this time period. The broader issue may have been police corruption and oppression, but the specific case in Detroit in the 1970s was a police decoy operation called Stress, or Stop the Robberies and Joyce Safe Streets, which was responsible for the unwarranted deaths of more than 22 black citizens. The night of December 4th, 1972, 3 young black men retaliated when a stress unit blasted a hole in the rear window of their Volkswagen. All 4 policemen were seriously wounded, but their intended victims escaped unscathed. 3 weeks later, the second shootout on December 27th left 1 officer dead and a second critically injured. The 3 men were John Percy Boyd Jr., Hayward Brown, and Mark Bethune. John was my brother and Hayward was my first cousin. In retaliation, the police department lashed out at the black community and targeted the families and friends of Boyd, Brown, and Bethune. The evening following the shootout, a battalion of police, at least 20, broke down the front door of my parents' house with a battering ram and held me, my mother, my stepbrother, and my 2-year-old baby brother at gunpoint. As they ransacked the house, I tried to calm my screaming baby brother and a nervous policeman with a carbine rifle aimed at us, yelling, "Freeze or I'll shoot." In a calm and deliberate tone, I kept repeating, "Can't you see I'm holding a baby? Can't you see I'm holding a baby?" After they were satisfied that my brother John was not hiding up the chimney or underneath freshly folded linen in the laundry room, they arrested me and my stepbrother, John Clore, and took us downtown to be grilled for hours under their heated frustration and anger. A couple of days later, I told a series of events to Dudley at Broadside Press Office. He listened patiently and sympathetically. I was working as his assistant editor at the time. The mainstream media had reported the official police explanation of the shootout as, quote, drug-related, without any information or interest in the mistreatment of the family or the black community at large. Dudley advised me to call Nadine Brown at the Michigan Chronicle, the black Detroit newspaper. His advice to involve the black press proved immensely effective. After a series of articles, we managed to counter the criminal characterization of Boyd, Brown, and Bethune and to publicize the police department's mass-scale harassment of the blacks in the city, especially young black males and anyone perceived to be sympathetic to their cause. The policeman actually threatened, "We'll blow up your damn house," because we wouldn't help them find John. As it was later reported, quote, hundreds of black families had their doors literally broken down and their lives threatened by groups of white men in plain clothes who had no search warrants and often did not bother to identify themselves as police. Eventually, 50 fully documented cases of illegal procedures were brought against the department. One totally innocent man, Durwood Forshee, could make no complaint because he was dead. This 57-year-old unemployed security guard was killed when he fired his shotgun at stress invaders whom he believed to be gang robbers. A group of activists formed Families Under Stress with the families to devise strategies to inform the public about the true nature of the incident and the young men's engagement in underground war against drug pushers. So actually the police John and Hayward and Mark were doing the police's job because they were not trying to deal with the heroin problem, but actually, as far as we could tell, were being paid off, and in this instance, we believe being protecting the drug dealers.
Right.
The newspaper headlines quoted Police Chief John Nichols' portrayal of them as mad dog killers and drug addicts who robbed dope houses to support their habit. As a result of our efforts, it was soon confirmed and reported that my brother was a Vietnam veteran and a student at Wayne State University. Mark Methune was a former member of SNCC and the Black Panther Party, and Hayward Brown was an 18-year-old on a political mission. After citywide rallies, a number of interviews on local Black and mainstream television programs, articles in Wayne State University student newspaper, The South End, and in other alternative publications, the perspective represented in the Detroit Free Press and the Detroit News shifted from the official police department line as the dailies began to engage some actual investigative reporting. The editor of the South End, Gene Cunningham, deployed a team of writers to investigate the Boyd Brown and Bethune story, including Tom Williams, Arthur Bowman Jr., Paul Curtis, Conrad Mallett Jr., Benita Burton, Chris Booker, and Sumi Ali Burr. Because of their coverage, the police consistently harassed these young college students. The consciousness of the city was considerably altered, and many citizens of the Black community became insulted when some Black leaders blamed Boyd, Brown, and Bethune for the repressive behavior of the police. Instead, the community continued to resist the retaliatory actions of the police department and came to share the sentiment not only were the police responsible for their own actions, but they were also irresponsible because they had done nothing to rid the community of drugs. Families under stress joined other community organizations to mount a more effective counterattack. These new allies included Councilwoman Irma Henderson and the young Marxist attorney Kenneth V. Cockrell Sr., who was a candidate for mayor at the time, and his cohorts, including the newly elected Marxist judge Justin Rabbit, who had initially refused to display the U.S. flag in his courtroom. We generated a highly visible and critical campaign against stress. Cockrell stormed into the stress hearing organized by the city council, and in a dramatic gesture, he dumped thousands of petitions on the table calling for the abolishment of the police unit stress. The statistics were frightening. The 1970s began with Detroit's police killing more civilians than any other police force in the nation. 7 civilian deaths for every 1,000 police officers on the force in 1971. Houston was second with a rate of 5 per 1,000. The 100-man stress unit formed that year added 22 more civilians to the death toll, all of them black, while conducting over 500 provocative and frequently illegal raids in Black neighborhoods. Far from stopping crime, stress added to the growing violence. In 1973, the number of homicide victims in Detroit was 3 times higher than the death toll in Northern Ireland's Civil War. This is a quote from Steve Babin's work in Detroit. Can we show the clip now from, is it up? Oh, okay. Is it running? Okay. This is the one that was organized by the city council, essentially by Irma Henderson was behind this. She ran an organization called the Equal Justice Council during this time. Run it twice? Okay. That's me gonna speak. Okay, oh, you got a little tag, good. Sound. In terms of policemen not just violating my rights, I don't think policemen violating my brother's rights. Telling lies on him. My brother does not have a criminal record. And also, I
today to attempt to justify the lawful rights of a police officer in effecting an arrest. They need no such justification.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Every time my big afros, I was, like black hair, So, it's weird looking at yourself like 50 years ago. The important thing also, I want to say a little bit about this hearing, because we were in Ford Auditorium, which no longer exists. It was down, on the Detroit River, some of you remember. But when we got there, the auditorium was completely, filled on the bottom, and in the balcony, there were police who were standing with rifles aimed, at us. And of course, one of the first things that we dealt with is like, look, you got to get them out of here. We are not a threat. We are citizens. This is, But that was basically the attitude of the police. And as you can see, their leader, John Nichols. Hayward Brown was the only survivor of the three. My brother John Boyd and Mark Bethune were tracked to Atlanta and killed by police in 2 separate shooting incidents. My brother was with our other brother, Darnell Winfield. They were assassinated in the dark of night by a black cop who was feared and hated by blacks in Atlanta. I got the news of my brother's death after returning to Detroit from a poetry festival at Central Michigan University, where I read with Dudley, Quincy Troupe, Etheridge Knight, Herb Martin, and Alice Walker. After Alice heard the report on the national news, she sent a condolence letter and signed copy of her broadside, Revolutionary Petunias, quote, "From Melba, may your petals grow like blades of steel to protect you." The family buried our dead and prepared for a series of trials for Hayward, who had been captured on the 12th of January in Detroit during daylight hours, unfortunately in front of several witnesses. He told me that he wanted Kendall Cockrell to defend him. Cockrell withdrew his bid for mayor and devoted himself full-time to Brown's defense. Cockrell, Ted Spearman, and Jeff Taft, an interracial legal team, masterminded a political offense that put the police on trial. The law firm did not charge Hayward for his defense, but there were court costs and expenditures. The family donated money. Members of Local 600 at the Fort Rouge Foundry, where Hayward's father worked, donated money. And there were fundraisers, including one at Wayne State's campus, where Hayward Brown and Ken Cockrell spoke, and jazz musicians lifted our spirits. Cockrell had been the former spokesman for the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, an organizational expansion of the Revolutionary Union movement in automobile plants, which was formed after a wildcat strike at Dodge factory in 1968. 4,000 Dodge Main workers, white as well as black, walked off the jobs without the UAW strike authorization. Activists associated with the Inner City Voice forged a new organization, the Dodge Revolutionary Union Movement, or DRUM. General Baker, the soul of DRUM, as described by the authors of Detroit I Do Dying, was fired from his job for leading the strike. It was this meeting of forces that took down black militancy to the heart of the fight for social change, where the black revolution of the 1960s had finally arrived at one of the most vulnerable links of the American economic system, the point of mass production, the assembly line, and Dodge's anger was the anger of the Great Rebellion. The 1967 Detroit riot, and its vision was that of a new society. Mike Hamlin, a drum leader, advocated a broader membership base involving students and community at large. This led to the establishment of the League, a Marxist or revolutionary organization that included personalities like John Watson, Gene Cunningham, and Ken Cockrell, who had by this time graduated from the Wayne State University Law School. In addition to his legal work and defense of members of the League, in 1971, he successfully defended James Johnson, a worker who had justly been fired by his foreman at a Chrysler plant. Johnson snapped and killed 4 men with an M1 carbine rifle. Cockrell turned the tables and put Chrysler on trial for damages to the man caused by these working conditions, unquote. The first of Hayward's trial took place in the courtroom of Judge George Crockett, a progressive black judge who had served on Paul Robeson's defense team and who had defied the Detroit Police Department after the attack of the people attending a conference at Reverend C.L. Franklin's New Bethel Baptist Church on March 29, 1968. Crockett set up court inside the jail, conducted hearings, and released 50 of 150 members and associates of the Republic of New Africa before the county prosecutor intervened with police. A mural by artist Leroy Foster depicting the conspiracy of the Harper's Ferry dramatized the left wall of Crockett's courtroom. Images of John Brown, Frederick Douglass, and Harriet Tubman set the scene for the People's Courtroom and the jury's acquittal of Hayward with a verdict of self-defense. Hayward was acquitted in all charges in 3 separate trials, and this victory invigorated and radicalized the mayoral election. Cockrell had endorsed Coleman Young's candidacy for mayor, and the fervor of the moment mobilized a record voting turnout to take over the city government and to get the police under control. Thank you.
Give our collective panel a round of applause.